The first time Eliza Lewis saw him across the crowded ballroom, she had no idea she was staring at the most powerful man in the city, or that he'd been waiting his entire life to find her. Eliza adjusted her simple black dress, feeling decidedly out of place among the glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos at the Metropolitan Museum's annual charity gala. As the museum's newest assistant curator, she'd been invited only because her supervisor had come down with the flu at the last minute. Even with her employee discount, the ticket had cost 2 weeks' worth of grocery money. Another glass of champagne? A server approached with a tray. No, thank you. Eliza's glass was still half full. At these prices, she planned to savor every sip. She scanned the room, recognizing several board members she'd met briefly during her interview. The museum's biggest donors were all in attendance, a who's who of New York's elite. Somewhere in this crowd was the mysterious benefactor who'd recently donated a priceless collection of Renaissance paintings, the collection she'd been hired to help catalog. "Enjoying the view?" asked a deep voice beside her. Eliza turned to find herself staring up at a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine cover. Tall, with broad shoulders perfectly filling out his tuxedo, he had dark hair swept back from a face with angles sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that caught her an unusual shade of blue-gray that reminded her of the ocean just before a storm. Eliza faltered, then smiled. "Actually, I was feeling a bit like an anthropologist observing a rare species in its natural habitat." The man laughed, a rich sound that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "That's a unique perspective. Most people here are too busy trying to blend in to notice what's happening around them." "I'm not most people," she replied before she could stop herself. "I gathered that." His smile deepened. "I'm Bennett. Eliza Lewis." She extended her hand, expecting a handshake, but instead, he took it gently in his and held it for a moment too long. "What brings you to this gathering of the rare species, Eliza Lewis?" "I work at the museum, assistant curator, newly hired. My boss caught the flu, so I got volunteered." She took a sip of champagne to hide her nervousness. "What about you? Business, politics, old money?" Bennett's eyes crinkled at the corners. "A bit of all three, I suppose. But tonight, I'm just a man enjoying a conversation with an intriguing woman who sees through the facade of these events." Something about his direct gaze made Eliza's heart beat faster. She was about to respond when a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. "Ah," Bennett said, his expression changing subtly. "That would be the mayor arriving. I should probably go say hello." He hesitated, then pulled a business card from his pocket. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Eliza Lewis. Perhaps we'll talk again." Before she could respond, he was gone, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this world. Eliza glanced down at the card in her hand. It was simple, elegant cream cardstock with only a name and phone number embossed in black. Bennett Everett. No title, no company. Just a name that somehow seemed vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place it. Eliza slipped the card into her clutch and tried to refocus on the event, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the man with the storm-blue eyes. What she didn't know was that Bennett Everett was watching her from across the room, and had been watching her long before tonight. The next morning, Eliza arrived at the museum earlier than usual. The Renaissance collection was scheduled to be unpacked today, and she wanted to be prepared. Her head still ached slightly from the single glass of champagne she'd nursed throughout the previous evening, a reminder that she wasn't used to such indulgences. As she unlocked her tiny office tucked away in the administrative wing, she noticed a package on her desk. A sleek white box tied with a simple black ribbon sat atop her organized stack of catalogs. Eliza frowned. The museum's security was tight. No one could have entered without clearance. Setting her coffee down, she cautiously approached the box and read the small card attached. "For the anthropologist, perhaps this will help with your field observations. B." Her heart skipped. Bennett Everett. But how had he known where her office was? Pulling the ribbon, she opened the box to find an exquisite small leather-bound notebook with an antique fountain pen nestled inside. Both were beautiful, but understated tasteful rather than flashy. Exactly the sort of thing she would have chosen for herself. Eliza ran her fingers over the smooth leather, perplexed. The gift was thoughtful, not extravagant enough to make her uncomfortable, yet personal in a way that suggested he had somehow known her preferences. "Morning, Lewis." Her department head, Dr. Patrick Morgan, appeared in her doorway. "Ready for the big unveiling?" She quickly closed the box. "Absolutely. The crates arrived last night?" "Just after midnight. The team's setting up in Gallery B now." He glanced at the white box. "Secret admirer?" "Just a thank you gift from someone I met at the Gala," she said, hoping her face wasn't as flushed as it felt. "Well, whoever it is has excellent taste. And speaking of excellent taste, wait until you see these paintings. The Everett collection is going to put us on the map." Eliza froze. "The Everett collection?" "Yes, Bennett Everett's family collection. 15 masterpieces that haven't been publicly displayed in over 50 years. Where have you been, Lewis? It's been all over the art news for months." Suddenly it clicked. Bennett Everett, heir to the Everett Industries fortune and one of the wealthiest men in America. The reclusive billionaire who rarely appeared in the press despite his family's prominence. The man whose Renaissance collection she would be cataloging for the next 6 months. The man who had singled her out at the Gala. "I knew the name sounded familiar," she said weakly. "I just didn't make the connection." Patrick laughed. "Well, get ready to make a lot more connections. Everett himself is coming at 10 to see the unpacking. Word is, he personally selected you to lead the cataloging project." What? Eliza felt the floor tilt beneath her. "That's impossible. I've never even met him before last night, and he didn't mention—" "Last night? You met Bennett Everett at the Gala?" Patrick looked impressed. "No wonder you got the assignment. Must have made quite an impression." Before she could respond, Patrick's phone buzzed. He checked it and grimaced. "Board meeting emergency. Head down to Gallery B and supervise the unpacking. I'll catch up with you later." As Patrick hurried away, Eliza sank into her chair, staring at the beautiful notebook. Bennett Everett had known exactly who she was last night. He'd approached her deliberately, presented himself as just Bennett, and then arranged to have her assigned to his priceless collection. Why would a billionaire go to such lengths to manipulate a meeting with an assistant curator? And more importantly, what did he want from her? Gathering her materials and the mysterious gift, Eliza headed toward Gallery B, her mind racing. Whatever game Bennett Everett was playing, she intended to find out the rules, and fast. The restoration room adjacent to Gallery B hummed with activity as white-gloved handlers carefully removed the first painting from its custom crate. Eliza stood back, clipboard in hand, watching as a Botticelli emerged from layers of protective packaging. "Primavera," she whispered, recognizing the masterpiece immediately. "I thought it was in the Uffizi." "That's a common misconception," said a familiar voice behind her. "This is actually Botticelli's first study for Primavera. The finished piece is indeed in Florence, but this preliminary work has been in my family since the 1800s. Eliza turned slowly, coming face to face with Bennett Everett. In daylight, without the dim lighting of the Gala, he was even more striking. His tailored charcoal suit complemented his eyes, which studied her with the same intensity she typically reserved for examining brushstrokes under a magnifier. "Mr. Everett," she said formally, extending her hand. "I believe proper introductions are in order this time." A smile played at the corners of his mouth as he shook her hand. "Please, it's still Bennett. And you're still Eliza," the anthropologist observing the rare species. "What I'm observing now is a man who wasn't entirely forthcoming last night," she replied, keeping her voice low enough that the restoration team couldn't hear. "You knew exactly who I was. I knew you were the museum's newest assistant curator with a specialty in Renaissance painting, yes." He didn't look remotely apologetic. "I wanted to meet you without the weight of my name influencing our conversation. You specifically requested me for this project. Why?" Bennett glanced around the busy room. "Perhaps we could discuss this over coffee? There's a cafe on the second floor that I'm told serves an excellent cappuccino." Eliza hesitated. She should stay and supervise the unpacking, but her curiosity was overwhelming. Besides, refusing to speak privately with their most important donor would hardly help her career. 15 minutes, she conceded. "I need to get back for the Caravaggio." As they walked through the museum's grand hallways, Eliza was acutely aware of how Bennett seemed to command space without effort. Staff members and visitors alike glanced at him with recognition and deference, though he acknowledged no one. At the cafe, he led her to a corner table partially hidden by a large potted fern. A server appeared instantly, taking their order without writing it down. "You still haven't answered my question," Eliza said once they were alone. Bennett leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I read your dissertation on symbolic imagery in early Renaissance portraiture. Your analysis of the Arnolfini portrait was illuminating." Eliza blinked in surprise. Her doctoral dissertation had been published in an obscure academic journal with a circulation of maybe 200 readers, most of them aging professors. "You read my dissertation?" "Twice, actually." "Your perspective on the mirror symbolism challenged several long-held interpretations." He paused as their coffee arrived. "When I decided to loan the Everett collection to the Met, I requested the most knowledgeable curator for Renaissance art. Your name wasn't on the list." Eliza felt a flush of embarrassment. Of course it wouldn't be. She was too junior. "So I did some research," he continued. "Found your dissertation, your publications, your academic record. You graduated top of your class at Columbia, turned down a fellowship at the Louvre to care for your grandmother, and have published more insightful analyses in the past 3 years than most tenured curators manage in a decade." The server returned with their coffees, giving Eliza a moment to process his words. Bennett Everett had researched her thoroughly before she'd ever laid eyes on him. "That still doesn't explain why you approached me at the Gala without introducing yourself properly," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Bennett took a sip of his espresso. "If I had introduced myself as Bennett Everett, donor of the collection you're about to work on, would you have felt comfortable telling me I looked like a rare species in its natural habitat?" Despite herself, Eliza smiled. "Probably not." "Exactly. I wanted to meet the real Eliza Lewis, not the professional version who would be careful around a major donor." His eyes held hers. "I'm surrounded by people who tell me what they think I want to hear. It's refreshing to encounter authenticity." There was something in his gaze that made Eliza feel suddenly vulnerable, as if he could see past her carefully constructed professional facade to the person beneath. It was unsettling and thrilling in a way she wasn't prepared for. "The notebook," she said, changing the subject. "How did you know where my office is?" "I own the building, Eliza," he said with a slight smile. "There's very little about the Metropolitan Museum of Art that I don't know." "That's not cryptic at all," she muttered, earning a genuine laugh from him. "Fair enough. I asked the security director where I could find you this morning. He was quite helpful once I mentioned my name." Eliza couldn't help but smile. The perks of being a billionaire, I suppose. Some are more valuable than others. There was something wistful in his tone that caught her attention, but before she could pursue it, he glanced at his watch. "Your 15 minutes are nearly up, and I believe there's a Caravaggio waiting for your expert eyes." As they walked back to Gallery B, Bennett spoke casually about his family's art collection, but Eliza found it hard to concentrate. Her mind kept returning to the fact that this powerful, enigmatic man had sought her out specifically, had researched her work and her life before ever meeting her. The question was, why? What did Bennett Everett really want from her? At the entrance to the gallery, he stopped. "I have a board meeting this afternoon, but I'd like to invite you to dinner this evening. To discuss the collection, of course." The professional in Eliza knew she should decline. Getting personally involved with a donor was risky territory. But the woman in her, the one who had felt that unexpected spark when their eyes met, was already nodding. "I'd like that," she said, surprised by her own boldness. "Excellent. My driver will pick you up at 7. He hesitated, then added, "Wear something comfortable. Where we're going isn't formal." Before she could ask where exactly that might be, he was gone, leaving Eliza standing in the gallery doorway with more questions than answers and the unsettling feeling that she had just stepped onto a path that would change everything. When the sleek black Bentley pulled up outside Eliza's modest Brooklyn apartment building at exactly 7 p.m., she was waiting on the stoop, having spent the last hour debating what comfortable meant to a billionaire. She'd finally settled on dark jeans, ankle boots, and a soft emerald sweater that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. The driver, a tall man with a military bearing who introduced himself as Harrison, held the door for her with a respectful nod. Inside, the car was empty. "Mr. Everett will meet you at the destination," Harrison explained, catching her questioning look in the rearview mirror. "He asked me to give you this." He handed back a sealed envelope with her name, written in an elegant, masculine script. Inside was a note on the same cream-colored stationery as the business card. "Eliza, I hope you'll forgive the mystery, but I wanted to show you something that few people have seen. Trust me for a few hours? Bennett." The car glided through Brooklyn, over the Manhattan Bridge, and into Lower Manhattan before turning onto a quiet street in Tribeca. They pulled into a private garage beneath an unmarked building where Bennett was waiting, dressed casually in dark jeans and a light gray sweater that softened his usual intensity. "You came," he said, opening her door himself. "Curiosity got the better of me," Eliza admitted as she stepped out. "Though I should warn you, my roommate has your license plate number and strict instructions to call the police if I don't check in by midnight." Bennett laughed. "Prudent. I assure you you'll be home well before then, though I hope you won't want to leave so soon." He led her to a private elevator at the back of the garage. "I want to show you where the Everett collection lived before it came to the Met." The elevator opened directly into what could only be described as a private museum. The large loft space was illuminated by carefully placed lighting that highlighted empty walls where paintings had clearly hung until recently. Climate control systems hummed quietly in the background, and special flooring designed to minimize vibration cushioned their steps. "This is where you kept them," Eliza breathed, her curator's eye taking in the perfect preservation conditions. "All 15 pieces." 16, Bennett corrected. "I kept one back. It's personal." He guided her around the space, pointing out where each painting had hung, sharing stories about how his grandfather had acquired some during the tumultuous years following World War II, saving them from being lost forever. "My grandfather had an eye for beauty that was about to be destroyed," Bennett explained, his voice warm with admiration. "He wasn't an educated art historian like you, but he understood value in all its forms." As he spoke, Eliza began to see a different side of Bennett Everett, not the powerful billionaire or the mysterious stranger from the Gala, but a man deeply connected to his family legacy, passionate about preservation and history. "And what about you?" she asked. "Do you share his eye for beauty about to be destroyed?" Something flickered in his expression. "I'd like to think so. That's partially why I wanted you on this project." He hesitated. "Come, let me show you the piece I kept." He led her to a door at the far end of the loft, unlocking it with a key he wore around his neck. The room beyond was smaller, more intimate, with a single painting illuminated on the far wall. Eliza gasped when she saw it. "Is that—" "A Raphael, yes. At least, it's attributed to him. It's never been authenticated by experts." Bennett stood beside her, watching her reaction carefully. "It's been in my family since the 1700s. The painting was of a young woman in Renaissance dress, her expression somehow both serene and knowing. She stood by a window, a small leather-bound book in her hands, with a landscape visible behind her that reminded Eliza of the Tuscan countryside. "She looks like you," Bennett said quietly. Eliza laughed. "I'm sure that's just the lighting in here." "No." His voice was serious. "The first time I saw you in a photograph accompanying an article you wrote for Art History Quarterly, I thought I was seeing her come to life. That's why I researched you. That's why I requested you for the collection." Eliza turned to him, uncertain. "Because I resemble a woman in a painting? Because seeing your face felt like finding something I'd been looking for my entire life," he said simply. The honesty in his voice was disarming. This wasn't a line, wasn't practiced charm. It was a confession that clearly made him vulnerable. "I don't understand," she said softly. Bennett moved to a nearby table and opened a portfolio. "These are infrared scans of the painting. Look at the underpainting, at what Raphael sketched before adding the final layers." Eliza leaned over the images, her professional curiosity overriding her confusion. What she saw made her breath catch. In the initial sketch, the woman was holding not a book, but what appeared to be a small mirror reflecting the face of the artist. "There's a theory," Bennett said, "that Raphael fell in love with this woman, the daughter of a merchant who commissioned her portrait. The mirror was too intimate to include in the final commission, so he painted over it. But he kept the connection between them in the work. That's fascinating, but my family has a legend, he continued, that whoever owns this painting is destined to find its subject their perfect match in their lifetime. My grandfather found my grandmother the month after he acquired the Botticelli. My father met my mother while negotiating for the Caravaggio. Eliza looked from the painting to Bennett, seeing the mixture of embarrassment and sincerity in his expression. You can't possibly believe that a 500-year-old painting predicted I would meet you? He smiled ruefully. No, not literally. But when I saw your photograph, something resonated. Then I read your work, learned about your life, your dedication, your intelligence. The more I discovered, the more I wanted to know you. So you engineered our meeting at the Gala, she said, putting the pieces together. I arranged to be introduced to you properly through the museum director. But then I saw you standing alone, watching everyone with those observant eyes, and I improvised. The admission should have bothered her. It was calculating, presumptuous. But there was something touchingly human about his confession. Bennett Everett, billionaire and business titan, had been nervous about meeting her. You could have just asked me out for coffee like a normal person, Eliza said, but she was smiling. Would you have said yes if you knew who I was? She considered this. Probably not. I would have assumed you had an ulterior motive. Like believing you're the reincarnation of a Renaissance merchant's daughter? He laughed. I can see how that might seem suspicious. Just a bit. She turned back to the painting, studying the woman's face more carefully. There was perhaps something in the shape of the eyes, the curve of the lips. Or maybe Bennett just wanted to see a connection. Either way, the painting was exquisite. It's beautiful. Why didn't you include it with the others for the exhibition? Because it's never been displayed publicly. My father believed it should stay private, that displaying it would somehow break the spell. He shook his head slightly. Irrational, I know. Not irrational, Eliza said softly. Sacred. Some things aren't meant to be shared with everyone. Bennett's eyes met hers, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, an understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. I had Harrison prepare dinner, he said after a moment. Nothing fancy, just pasta and wine on the terrace. Would you join me? I'd like that, she replied, surprised to realize how much she meant it. The terrace overlooked the Hudson River, the lights of New Jersey twinkling across the water. A small table had been set with candles, a bottle of wine breathing beside 2 glasses. The meal was simple, but perfect fresh pasta with a light sauce, crusty bread, a salad of greens and tomatoes. As they ate, they talked about art, about history, about the stories that paintings could tell. Bennett was knowledgeable, but not pretentious, asking questions as often as offering opinions. He listened when Eliza spoke, truly listened in a way that made her feel her words mattered. You're not what I expected, she admitted, as they shared a dessert of fresh berries and cream. What did you expect? The arrogant billionaire playboy from page 6. Eliza laughed. Something like that. But you're actually what? He prompted when she hesitated. Real, she finished. You're just a person who happens to have a lot of money and a slightly superstitious attachment to a Renaissance painting. Bennett's laugh was warm in the cool night air. You have a gift for bringing people down to earth. Eliza Lewis. Is that a compliment or a complaint? Definitely a compliment. His smile faded into something more serious. Most people in my life are there because of what I can do for them. Money creates a distortion field. You never know if someone likes you or what you represent. Is that why you didn't tell me who you were at the gala? To see if I'd like just Bennett? Partly, he admitted, though I wasn't expecting to like Eliza quite so much. The candlelight caught the warmth in his eyes, and Eliza felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the wine they'd been drinking. It's getting late, she said reluctantly. I should probably get back to Brooklyn, early morning tomorrow with the collection. Of course. Bennett stood, offering his hand to help her up. I've kept you long enough. Harrison will take you home. At the elevator, he hesitated. Would it be too forward to ask if I could see you again? Not at the museum, not as donor and curator, but just us? Eliza knew the professional thing would be to decline, to keep their relationship strictly business. But there was something about Bennett Everett that made her want to break her own rules. "I'd like that," she said. "But next time, I pick the place, somewhere normal people go." His smile was worth the risk. "It's a date." As Harrison drove her home, Eliza leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. She'd gone to dinner expecting to meet the billionaire, the powerful donor, the man who had manipulated their first meeting. Instead, she'd discovered Bennett thoughtful, a bit awkward, passionate about art and history, and looking at her as if she were something precious he'd never expected to find. The rational part of her knew she should be cautious. Men like Bennett Everett didn't typically pursue assistant curators from Brooklyn unless they wanted something. But another part, the part that had felt that inexplicable connection when their eyes met, wondered if sometimes the impossible stories, the ones about paintings and destiny and finding what you've been searching for, might contain a grain of truth. Either way, she realized as the car pulled up to her building, she was going to find out. Over the next few weeks, Eliza found herself living in two worlds. By day, she was Assistant Curator Lewis, methodically cataloging the Everett collection, noting condition issues, researching provenance details, and preparing for the exhibition opening in 3 months. But increasingly, her evenings and weekends belonged to a different reality, one where she was just Eliza, discovering New York with Bennett. True to her word, she chose ordinary places for their dates. They ate hot dogs in Central Park, browsed used bookstores in the Village, and stood in line for pizza at a tiny shop in Queens that Bennett declared better than anything he'd had in Italy. He wore jeans and hoodies with sunglasses, and was rarely recognized, or if he was, people were too polite to interrupt. "Is this really how you spend your time when you're not running a multinational corporation?" Eliza asked one Saturday as they sat on a bench in Washington Square Park, sharing a bag of roasted chestnuts. "Not exactly," Bennett admitted, tossing a chestnut shell into a nearby trash can. "Usually I'm in meetings, on calls, reviewing financial projections, or attending functions where people want something from me." "Sounds thrilling," she teased. "About as thrilling as cataloging Renaissance paintings." "Hey," she nudged his shoulder. "That happens to be fascinating work. Each painting tells a story about the artist, the subject, the time it was created." Bennett's expression softened. "That's what I love about watching you work. You see stories where others just see assets or decorations." It was true. To Eliza, the Everett collection wasn't just 15 masterpieces worth millions. It was 15 windows into history, into human experience captured in pigment and brushstrokes. Working with them was a privilege she never took for granted. "Speaking of work," Bennett said, "there's a fundraising dinner for the museum next Friday. As the collection's donor, I'm expected to attend." "I know." The curatorial staff received invitations too. Eliza had been planning to skip it. The tickets were expensive even with the employee discount. "Would you come as my guest?" His tone was casual, but Eliza could sense the importance of the question. This would be their first public appearance together, a statement neither of them could take back. "Are you sure? People will talk." "Let them." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm tired of pretending I run into you accidentally at the museum cafeteria 3 times a week." Eliza laughed. Those accidental meetings had become a highlight of her workdays. "What about professional boundaries? I'm working on your collection." "Technically, it's the museum's collection now," he pointed out. "I'm just the donor, and if it makes you feel better, Patrick told me yesterday that he's so impressed with your work that he's recommending you for associate curator." "He is?" Eliza's heart leapt. Associate curator was years ahead of her expected career trajectory. "Based entirely on merit," Bennett added quickly. "I had nothing to do with it." She studied his face, seeing only sincerity there. In the weeks she'd known him, she'd discovered that despite his power and wealth, Bennett was scrupulously ethical. He would never use his influence to advance her career. If anything, he bent over backward to ensure their personal relationship didn't affect her professional life. "Then yes," she decided, "I'll come as your guest." His smile was worth any gossip they might face. The fundraising dinner was held in the museum's Temple of Dendur, the Egyptian monument dramatically lit against the glass walls overlooking Central Park. Eliza wore a simple floor-length gown in deep blue, bought years ago for a cousin's wedding, and updated with new accessories. Bennett met her at the staff entrance, handsome in his tuxedo, but with an anxious expression that vanished when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice husky. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, trying for lightness despite the butterflies in her stomach. As they entered the event together, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, Eliza felt the subtle shift in the room, the glances, the whispers, the recalibration of social calculations as New York's elite processed the sight of Bennett Everett with an unknown woman on his arm. "Bennett!" A silver-haired man approached, hand extended. "Didn't expect to see you tonight. You usually send a representative to these things." "Theodore?" Bennett shook his hand. "I had a good reason to attend this time. May I introduce Eliza Lewis? She's the associate curator working on my family's collection." "Eliza, this is Theodore Marshall, CEO of Marshall Media." "Pleasure," Theodore said, barely glancing at her before turning back to Bennett. "Listen, about that Asian expansion we discussed." "Not tonight, Theodore," Bennett interrupted smoothly. "I'm here as a museum patron, not a businessman." Theodore looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Of course. Perhaps next week." He retreated, already scanning the room for another target. "That's going to happen all night, isn't it?" Eliza murmured. "Unfortunately, yes, but I've developed excellent extraction skills over the years." Bennett guided her toward their table near the front. "Just give me a signal if you're feeling overwhelmed." As dinner progressed, Eliza watched Bennett navigate the social currents with practiced ease. He deflected business inquiries, introduced her respectfully to everyone who approached, and somehow managed to keep their conversation flowing despite constant interruptions. During dessert, Patrick Morgan stopped by their table, his expression a mixture of surprise and calculation as he looked between them. "Eliza, didn't expect to see you here." He turned to Bennett. "Mr. Everett, the exhibition planning is coming along beautifully. Your collection will be displayed exactly as we discussed." "I'm sure it will be perfect," Bennett replied, "especially with Eliza overseeing the details. Her knowledge of Renaissance symbolism has added depth to the exhibition I hadn't anticipated." Patrick's eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes, well, Eliza has always shown potential." After he moved on, Eliza sighed. "That was awkward." "He's recalculating his approach to you," Bennett observed, "trying to determine if you're now an asset to cultivate or a threat to manage. Office politics are exhausting enough without adding." She gestured between them. "Us?" Bennett supplied. "Is that what we are? An us?" The question had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. Bennett's expression grew serious. "I'd like us to be, if that's what you want too." Before she could respond, the museum director tapped a microphone, calling for attention to begin the fundraising portion of the evening. The moment passed, but Eliza felt Bennett's hand find hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers as if he had no intention of letting go. Later, as they swayed together on the small dance floor, Eliza felt simultaneously exposed and protected in Bennett's arms. Everyone was watching them, the mysterious billionaire and the unknown curator. But in that moment, with his cheek pressed against her temple and his hand warm against her back, she couldn't bring herself to care. "Still with me?" he murmured against her hair. "Still here," she confirmed, tightening her arms around his neck slightly. "Good." He drew back enough to meet her eyes. "Because there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his voice made her heart skip. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just important." He guided her toward one of the side exits. "Can we find somewhere quiet to talk?" They slipped away from the party and through the darkened Egyptian galleries until they reached the European paintings wing, where the Everett collection would eventually be displayed. The security guard nodded respectfully at Bennett, clearly recognizing him, and discreetly moved to the far end of the hall. "Bennett, what's going on?" Eliza asked once they were alone amongst the silent artworks. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of nervousness. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you about something." Eliza felt a chill. Here it was, the catch, the ulterior motive she'd been waiting for. "The painting the Raphael that looks like you," he began. "There's more to the story than I told you." "More superstitious family legends?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. In a way. He paced a few steps. The woman in the painting, her name was Elena Lucchesi. She was the daughter of a Florentine merchant who traded in rare pigments and materials for artists. How do you know her name? Because there's a journal that accompanies the painting. It belonged to Raphael's apprentice, who recorded the master's commissions. Bennett stopped pacing to face her. According to the journal, Raphael met Elena when he came to buy ultramarine from her father. He fell in love with her immediately, but she was already promised to another man, a wealthy banker. Eliza frowned. I don't understand what this has to do with us. The journal says Raphael believed they had known each other in a previous life, that they were souls destined to find each other again and again throughout time. Bennett's eyes held hers. He painted her secretly, hiding his feelings in symbols within the work. The mirror that was painted over it showed his face reflected, watching her. The landscape behind her is where they first met. The book she holds contains a pressed forget-me-not. Bennett. I know how this sounds, he interrupted. Believe me, I know. I've always considered myself a rational person. But from the moment I saw your photograph, I felt recognition, not déjà vu, not attraction, though there's certainly that too, but a bone-deep certainty that I knew you. Eliza didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to back away from this intensity, this impossible story that sounded like the plot of a romantic fantasy. But another part, the part that had felt drawn to Bennett from their first meeting, whispered that perhaps some connections couldn't be explained by logic alone. What happened to them, Elena and Raphael? She asked instead. Bennett's expression softened. They never married. Elena fulfilled her family's expectations and wed the banker. Raphael died young, as history records. But the journal says they found moments of happiness together, brief stolen hours where they could simply be together. That's sad, Eliza said quietly. It is. Which is why... Bennett took her hands in his. I don't want history to repeat itself. I don't want just stolen moments with you, Eliza. I want a future. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever he believed about paintings and past lives and destined souls, his feelings for her in this life, this moment, were real. I don't know if I believe in reincarnation or destined souls, she said carefully. But I do know that what I feel for you is unlike anything I've experienced before. It scares me how quickly it's happened. It scares me too, he admitted. I've spent my life making calculated decisions, weighing risks and benefits. There's nothing calculated about how I feel about you. In the quiet gallery, surrounded by centuries of painted witnesses to human love and loss, Eliza made her decision. She stepped forward and kissed him, a gentle affirmation that whatever had brought them together, coincidence, fate, or a Renaissance painter's hidden portrait, she was choosing this connection here and now. When they eventually broke apart, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. Does this mean you're willing to see where this goes, despite my slightly eccentric beliefs about Italian paintings? Eliza laughed softly. I suppose I can overlook the eccentricity, given your other qualities, such as my charming personality and humble nature. I was thinking more about your excellent taste in art and ability to get us into museums after hours, she teased. His smile lit something warm inside her. I'll take it. As they walked back toward the fundraiser, hands linked between them, Eliza knew they were crossing a threshold. Whatever came next, the publicity, the questions, the inevitable complications of their different worlds colliding, they would face it together. And if sometimes, in quiet moments, she found herself wondering about a merchant's daughter in Renaissance Florence, who might have looked at an artist with the same feelings she had for Bennett, well, some mysteries were worth embracing. The exhibition opening was 6 weeks away, and Eliza's days were consumed with final preparations. Labels needed proofing, lighting required adjustment, and the catalog demanded last-minute edits. She worked late most evenings, her tiny office becoming a second home. Bennett respected her professional space, never appearing at the museum during working hours unless it was for official business. But each night, no matter how late she finished, she would find his driver waiting to take her home, or, increasingly often, to Bennett's Tribeca loft, where they would share a late dinner and talk for hours. You're going to wear yourself out, Bennett said one evening as they sat on his terrace, a light spring rain pattering against the awning above them. "The exhibition will be brilliant with or without you checking every comma in the catalog," says the man who once stayed awake for 72 hours to personally oversee a company merger, Eliza retorted, though she leaned gratefully into his side as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. That was different. Billions of dollars and thousands of jobs were at stake. And this is 15 priceless masterpieces and my professional reputation. She stifled a yawn. Besides, I'm fine. Bennett's chest rumbled with a skeptical laugh. You fell asleep holding a fork 10 minutes ago. I was just resting my eyes. Of course you were. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Stay tonight. The guest room is made up, and Harrison can take you home in the morning to change before work. Eliza hesitated. Though they had been dating for nearly 2 months, their relationship remained remarkably traditional. Bennett never pressured her, seemed content to let things develop at their own pace. She had stayed in his guest room once before, after an evening when they'd lost track of time, discussing a book they'd both loved. Okay, she agreed, but just to sleep. I'm too exhausted for anything else. I'll try to contain my disappointment, he said dryly, but his eyes were warm with affection rather than frustration. Later, after showing her to the guest room and bidding her good night with a gentle kiss, Bennett retreated to his study. Eliza changed into the t-shirt and shorts he'd lent her, climbed into the ridiculously comfortable bed, and fell asleep almost instantly. She woke sometime in the night, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. A nightmare had jolted her awake, something about the paintings being damaged, about failing, about losing everything she'd worked for. Her heart was still racing as she sat up, trying to catch her breath. Without thinking, she padded down the hall toward where she knew Bennett's room was. The door was partially open, a soft light spilling out. She knocked gently. Bennett? Eliza? His voice came immediately, followed by footsteps. He appeared in the doorway, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair rumpled. Are you okay? Just a bad dream, she said, suddenly feeling foolish. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... No, come in. He stepped back, gesturing her inside. I was just reading. Couldn't sleep. His bedroom was surprisingly simple, no opulent furnishings or ostentatious displays of wealth, just a large bed with rumpled sheets, bookshelves lining one wall, and large windows overlooking the city. A book lay open on the bedside table next to a half-empty glass of water. What was the dream about? He asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Eliza remained standing, arms wrapped around herself. The exhibition, everything going wrong, typical anxiety dream. Come here. He patted the space beside him. She hesitated, then sat down, the mattress dipping slightly under their combined weight. I'm being ridiculous. The exhibition planning is going perfectly. It's not ridiculous to care about your work. Bennett's hand found hers in the dim light. But for what it's worth, I've seen how meticulously you're preparing. Nothing will go wrong. You can't promise that. No, he agreed. But I can promise that whatever happens, it won't change how exceptional you are at what you do. The simple confidence in his voice steadied her. Since they'd begun dating, Bennett had become her greatest supporter, believing in her abilities even when her own confidence wavered. Thank you, she said softly. He smiled, then glanced at the clock. It's 3 a.m. You should try to get some more sleep. I should go back to the guest room, she agreed, but made no move to leave. Bennett seemed to understand her hesitation. Or you could stay, just to sleep, he added quickly. Sometimes it's easier not to be alone after a nightmare. The offer was tempting, not just the comfort of not being alone, but the specific comfort of being with him. Over the past weeks, Eliza had found herself falling deeper into whatever this was between them, this connection that somehow felt both new and familiar at once. Okay, she decided. Just to sleep. Bennett pulled back the covers on the other side of the bed. Eliza slipped beneath them, the sheets still warm from where he'd been lying earlier. He turned off the bedside lamp and settled beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. In the darkness, Eliza found herself relaxing, the lingering anxiety from her nightmare fading in the simple security of his presence. After a moment, she shifted closer, reaching for his hand. He intertwined their fingers without hesitation. Better? He murmured. Much. She closed her eyes, feeling sleep tugging at her again. Bennett? I think I'm falling in love with you, she whispered, the darkness making it easier to voice the feelings she'd been harboring for weeks. His breath caught audibly. Then he was gathering her close, his arms wrapping around her as if she were something precious. I fell in love with you the moment you called me a rare species at the Gala, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Eliza laughed softly against his chest. That's a terrible moment to fall in love with someone. It was perfect. His hand stroked gently up and down her back. You saw me not the billionaire, not the donor, just me. I see you now, too, she whispered. When Bennett kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she'd always been meant to find. Whatever doubts she'd harbored about their different worlds, about his intensity, about the strangeness of how they'd met, none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was this, the feeling of rightness, of belonging, of finally finding a missing piece she hadn't known she was searching for. Much later, as dawn began to lighten the windows and they lay tangled together in the sheets, Bennett traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. Move in with me, he said suddenly. Eliza propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. What? Move in with me, he repeated. Not here unless you want to. We could find a new place together, something that's ours rather than mine. Bennett, we've only been dating for 2 months. I know it seems fast. His eyes held hers, earnest and vulnerable. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. When you're not here, everything feels incomplete. Eliza understood that feeling all too well. Her Brooklyn apartment, once her sanctuary, now seemed empty without him. But still. What about my work? People already whisper about favoritism because I'm dating the donor. Your work speaks for itself, Bennett said firmly. The exhibition will prove that to anyone who still doubts. And what about your world? The galas, the board meetings, the business dinners? I don't belong there. You belong with me, he said simply. The rest is just noise. Eliza hesitated, torn between the cautious voice that said this was moving too quickly and the deeper certainty that he was what she wanted. Can I think about it? She asked finally. Of course. He kissed her forehead. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As the morning light strengthened, casting golden patterns across the rumpled bed, Eliza nestled closer to Bennett's warmth. Whatever she decided about moving in, she knew with absolute clarity that their paths were now irrevocably intertwined. Like figures in a Renaissance painting, they had found each other across the crowded canvas of life, creating a composition that somehow felt both new and centuries in the making. The night of the exhibition opening arrived with the perfect blend of anticipation and terror that accompanies any major museum event. The Metropolitan's grand halls were filled with New York's elite, art critics, major donors, and select members of the press, all gathered to witness the unveiling of the Everett collection. Eliza stood in a corner of the main gallery, surveying her work with critical eyes. Each painting was perfectly positioned, the lighting highlighting the masterful brushwork without causing damage. The information panels she'd labored over provided context without overwhelming the art itself. It was exactly as she'd envisioned it. Breathe, Patrick Morgan said, appearing beside her with 2 champagne flutes. Everything looks perfect. She accepted the champagne gratefully. The Botticelli's lighting could be a fraction brighter. It's perfect, he repeated firmly. The Times critic already called it a masterclass in exhibition design, and he hasn't even seen the catalog yet. Eliza took a careful sip of champagne, conscious of her emerald green gown. Bennett had insisted on buying it for her, despite her protests about the extravagance. It's not a gift, it's an investment in the exhibition's success, he'd argued with a smile. Besides, I want to see the look on everyone's face when they realize the most beautiful masterpiece in the room isn't hanging on the wall. Now, scanning the crowd, she caught sight of him across the gallery, engaged in conversation with the museum's board chairman. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his eyes finding hers instantly. Even from a distance, the warmth in his expression made her heart skip. Your benefactor seems pleased, Patrick observed, following her gaze. He appreciates seeing his family's collection properly displayed, she replied neutrally. Patrick's eyebrow rose slightly. Indeed. Well, I should mingle. The director wants to introduce you to some people in about 20 minutes. Meet us by the Caravaggio. As he moved away, Bennett approached, navigating the crowd with practiced ease. Assistant Curator Lewis, he greeted formally, though his eyes danced with private humor. The exhibition exceeds all expectations. Mr. Everett, she returned with equal formality. I'm pleased you approve. May I steal you away for a moment? There's something in the Renaissance portraiture room I'd like your professional opinion on. Curious, Eliza followed him through the crowd to a smaller gallery adjacent to the main exhibition space. This room contained the portrait section of the collection, including several lesser-known but still valuable works. To her surprise, a new painting had been added since her last walk through that morning, hanging in a space she had deliberately left empty for balanced composition. It was the Raphael portrait, the one Bennett had kept private, the painting of the woman who resembled her. "Bennett," she breathed, "what is it doing here?" "I donated it," he said simply. "Officially, as of this morning, it belongs with the rest of the collection. But you said it was personal, that your father believed displaying it would break the spell." Bennett took both her hands in his. "I don't need a painting to find you anymore, Eliza. I have you here, in real life." His smile was tender. "Besides, something this beautiful deserves to be seen." The gesture touched her deeply. She knew what the painting meant to him, understood the family legacy and personal mythology he was relinquishing by making it public. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trusting me with it. There's something else." Bennett looked suddenly nervous, his usual confidence faltering. "Something I wanted to ask you. Here, with Elena watching over us." Eliza's heart began to race as he reached into his pocket. "Bennett?" "I had a whole speech prepared," he said, "about time and fate and finding each other. But standing here with you, none of those words seem adequate." He opened his hand to reveal a small velvet box. "I know it's fast. I know the rational response would be to wait, to take more time. But I've spent my life making calculated decisions, and the one thing I'm absolutely certain of is that I want to spend the rest of it with you." Opening the box, he revealed a ring unlike any Eliza had expected, not a massive diamond or ostentatious setting, but an antique gold band set with a deep blue stone surrounded by tiny pearls. It looked like something from another time, elegant and understated. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "The sapphire reminded me of the ultramarine in the Raphael." Eliza stared at the ring, then at Bennett, her mind racing. They had known each other for just over 3 months. It was too soon, too fast, too impulsive for someone as careful and methodical as she had always been. And yet, "If you need time," Bennett began. "Yes," Eliza interrupted. Bennett blinked. "Yes, you need time? Yes, I'll marry you." The certainty in her voice surprised even her. "I don't need time to know what I already feel." For a moment, Bennett stood frozen, as if he hadn't actually expected her to accept. Then his face broke into a smile of such pure joy that it took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then he was kissing her, lifting her slightly off her feet in his enthusiasm. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Eliza became aware of applause. Turning, she saw they had gathered an audience, museum staff, patrons. Even the director and several board members stood watching from the gallery entrance. "I think we've just become part of the exhibition," she whispered, mortified. "Let them look," Bennett replied, his arm secure around her waist. Some works of art deserve an audience. Later that night, after speeches and congratulations and countless glasses of champagne, they stood alone in the empty gallery. The guests had departed, the staff had gone home, and only the night security guards remained, discreetly keeping their distance. "Are you sure about this?" Bennett asked as they stood before the Raphael portrait, her hand in his, the antique ring catching the soft gallery lighting. "About us?" Eliza looked from the painted woman's face to the man beside her. Whether by coincidence, fate, or some cosmic connection spanning centuries, she had found someone who saw her completely, who valued her mind as much as her heart, who looked at her with a wonder that made her feel both seen and cherished. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said, and knew it was true. "Even though I come with complicated family paintings and superstitious beliefs about Renaissance artists?" She laughed. "Even though?" although I reserve the right to tease you about it for the rest of our lives. I would expect nothing less." His expression grew serious. "I want you to know that I've instructed my lawyers to set up a trust for the collection. No matter what happens between us, though, I intend to spend the next 50 years making you happy. Your position with the museum and your work with the Everett collection is secure." The gesture, practical yet deeply thoughtful, was so quintessentially Bennett that Eliza felt her heart swell with affection. "Thank you," she said. "Though I think I'll be too busy cataloging our own private collection to worry about job security." "Our collection?" His eyebrows rose in interest. "The future Everett Lewis collection," she clarified. "I thought perhaps we could start with contemporary works, establish our own legacy alongside your family's." The happiness that bloomed across his face told her she'd given him a gift. He hadn't known he wanted a future that honored the past while creating something new, something that belonged just to them. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." She glanced up at the portrait. With or without Elena's blessing, Bennett followed her gaze to the painting that had set their story in motion. "I like to think she approves." "Of course she does," Eliza said, leaning into his embrace. She had excellent taste in art and men. As they stood together in the quiet gallery, surrounded by centuries of painted witnesses to human connection, Eliza knew they were adding their own chapter to an ageless story, one where souls recognize each other across crowded rooms, where paintings hold secrets only lovers can decode, and where sometimes, just sometimes, the most rational explanation for finding your other half is that you were always meant to. 6 months later, Eliza stood in the dressing room of a small Tuscan villa, adjusting the simple white dress that flowed to her ankles. Outside, the September sun bathed the countryside in golden light, illuminating the same landscape that appeared in the background of the Raphael portrait. "Are you ready?" her mother asked, entering with a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the villa's gardens. "Almost." Eliza accepted the flowers, their colors vibrant against her dress. "Is Bennett here?" "Waiting in the courtyard, looking terribly handsome and utterly nervous." Her mother smiled. "I've never seen a man so anxious to get married." When Bennett had suggested Italy for their wedding, Eliza had expected something grand, a historic cathedral perhaps, or a Renaissance palazzo. Instead, he'd surprised her with this: a private ceremony at a secluded countryside villa with only their closest family and friends in attendance. "I thought we might honeymoon in Florence," he'd explained when proposing the location. "There's a small merchant's house that's been converted into a museum. It was Elena Lucchese's family home." The gesture had touched her deeply. Whether or not she fully believed in their connection to the painting's subjects, she appreciated how Bennett honored the story that had brought them together. Taking a deep breath, Eliza followed her mother downstairs and into the sun-dappled courtyard where their small gathering waited. At the far end, beneath an arch of climbing roses, stood Bennett, his face lighting up as she appeared. As she walked toward him, Eliza felt a sense of rightness that transcended logic or explanation. Perhaps there was truth in Bennett's belief that they had found each other before, in another time and place. Or perhaps they were simply two people fortunate enough to recognize what they had found when chance brought them together at a museum gala. Either way, as she reached him and took his outstretched hands, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. "You're beautiful," Bennett whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "So are you," she replied, smiling up at him. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising partnership, respect, and a lifetime of seeing each other as they truly were, not as the world perceived them. When the simple gold band joined her sapphire engagement ring, Eliza felt a sense of completion. Looking into Bennett's eyes as he was pronounced her husband, she saw the same emotion reflected there: joy, certainty, and a bone-deep recognition that went beyond their brief time together. At the intimate reception that followed, as the sun set over the Tuscan hills and lanterns illuminated the villa's terrace, Bennett pulled her away from their celebrating guests for a moment of privacy. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to a quiet corner where a package wrapped in simple paper waited. "Bennett, you didn't need to get me anything else. This whole wedding has been perfect." "Just open it," he urged, an unusual nervousness in his voice. Unwrapping the package, Eliza found a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it carefully, she saw handwritten Italian text, the ink faded but still legible. "Is this Raphael's apprentice's journal?" Bennett confirmed. "The one I told you about, that mentioned Elena." Eliza ran her fingers over the ancient pages in wonder. "This is a museum piece. It should be preserved, studied." "It will be. I've arranged for it to join the Everett collection at the Met after we've had a chance to study it together." He turned to a page marked with a silk ribbon. "But there's something I wanted you to see first. My Italian isn't perfect, but I had it translated." He handed her a typed sheet with an English translation of the marked passage. "Today the master completed the portrait of the merchant's daughter, Elena, though he has painted over the mirror that revealed his face watching her. He confided in me that he has hidden another secret within the work. Beneath the paint, invisible to all eyes save God's, he has written, 'When we meet again in another life, I will recognize you, and this time I will not let you go.' The master believes our souls return to find those we have loved before. I pray he finds peace in this belief, as the girl marries another tomorrow." Eliza looked up from the translation to find Bennett watching her intently. "I don't know if I believe in past lives," she said softly, "but I do know that from the moment I met you, something in me recognized something in you. Call it fate, coincidence, or Renaissance magic. What matters is that we found each other." Bennett took her hand, his thumb caressing the rings he had placed there. "And this time, I'm not letting you go." "Good." She reached up to touch his face. "Because I have no intention of going anywhere." As music drifted from the reception and the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the Tuscan sky, Bennett pulled her close. They swayed together, not quite dancing, simply being in the moment. Two souls who had found each other across a crowded gala, against the odds of their different worlds, guided perhaps by the echo of a love painted centuries before. Whether the story of Elena and Raphael had brought them together, or merely provided the framework for their own unique connection, Eliza knew that she and Bennett were writing a new chapter now, one where recognition led to love, where art preserved not just images but possibilities, and where sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the most perfect endings. And as Bennett kissed her under the Italian stars, Eliza thought she felt the universe sigh in satisfaction, as if a circle begun long ago had finally, perfectly closed.